I spent 53 years believing that family holds you close, especially around Christmas. Maybe it was something I convinced myself of because the world felt safer when I believed in that idea. Maybe it was something I clung to because the little boy inside me still remembered what it felt like to sit on my mom's lap in front of the fireplace while she read me stories. Back then, she always said Christmas was the one time of year when family should feel whole, no matter what had happened during the rest of the year. I held on to those words like they were carved into stone. But looking back now, I realize I was holding on to memories that did not match reality anymore. I remember the morning everything changed because it felt colder than usual even inside my own house. It was the kind of cold that sneaks inside your bones long before you even open the door to step outside. The sky was still dark even though the clock said it was almost 8. I got up, made myself some coffee, and sat at the kitchen table like I always did. My house was quiet the way it always is when you live alone long enough to get used to your own silence. Some people hate that kind of quiet, but for me, it always felt like the only space where I could breathe without trying to prove anything to anyone. I watched the steam rise from the mug in slow curls, and for a second I felt a little warmth. But the warmth didn't last long because my phone buzzed on the table. Just one short vibration. One message. No big deal, right? Except that single message was the thing that knocked the breath out of my chest harder than any punch I ever took in my life. I reached for the phone thinking maybe it was a reminder from the pharmacy or a weather alert. Something simple, something normal. But when I saw my mom's name on the screen, I sat up straight. She didn't message me often anymore. Not unless she needed something done around the house or wanted to tell me something about my brother Mark. But seeing her name with no context gave me this weird, uneasy feeling, almost like someone tapped me on the back when I knew I was alone in the room. I opened the message, and at first my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. It was short, too short. There was no warmth in her words, no kindness, just a cold statement telling me the Christmas dinner was already planned and there was no room for me this year. She wrote it like she was canceling a dentist appointment. Like I was a small inconvenience that could simply be removed from the picture. She told me to enjoy the holiday on my own. For a long moment I just stared at the screen. I kept blinking like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Maybe she mistyped it. Maybe she thought she was sending someone else a message, but deep down I knew there was no mistake. My mom meant exactly what she wrote. She cut me out. Not with anger, not with a fight, but with a message so casual it felt like a slap without the sound. I could feel my chest tighten the longer I read it. The kitchen felt colder. The walls felt further away. Even the steam from the coffee disappeared like it didn't want to be in the room with me. I thought about all the Decembers before this one. All the times I drove through snowstorms to get to her house on time. All the times I brought gifts even when my paycheck was tight. All the times I helped her decorate because she said she couldn't lift heavy things. Every year I showed up, even when Mark didn't. Even when everyone else was too busy, I was always there, and somehow that meant nothing now. I put the phone down slowly like it was something fragile. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the window. Outside, the world kept moving like nothing happened. Cars passed. Neighbors walked dogs. Someone scraped ice off a windshield. Life went on, but inside me something cracked in a way I didn't expect. I felt this strange mix of sadness, anger, confusion, and something else I couldn't name. Not exactly pain, not exactly resignation. It felt like the kind of hurt that comes from a place so deep you can't even reach it with your own hands. And the longer I sat there, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about one Christmas. This wasn't some small oversight. This was years of being pushed to the side finally showing itself in one simple message. I realized in that moment that I had been the easy child for too long, the dependable one, the quiet one, the son who never made trouble, and because of that my mom felt she could take me for granted without a second thought. But there was something she didn't know, something I had quietly prepared months before. Something she never even imagined possible because she always assumed I would just keep giving without ever giving up. She didn't know about the will. She didn't know about the changes I made. She didn't know I had finally chosen to protect myself, even if it meant shocking everyone who believed they understood who I was. I had been organizing my financial plans for months, not out of spite, not out of anger, but out of a growing realization that my family only valued me when they needed something from me. I had built a life through years of hard work, long hours, and sacrifices nobody else saw. And suddenly, I asked myself a simple question. Why should the people who ignored me claim everything I earned just because we share a last name? That morning, as I sat there staring at the message, something inside me settled. Not in a bitter way, but in a clear, steady way. My mom had made her choice. Now she would have to face mine. And without even knowing it, she had pushed me toward the moment that would change everything. My gift to her this Christmas wasn't wrapped in paper. It wasn't tied with ribbon. It came in the form of a decision that was going to shake the foundation of our family and show them exactly who they turned their backs on. This is the Christmas she cut me out of her home. And this is the Christmas I finally stopped living like the forgotten son. This is where the story begins. Growing up in a small American town where everybody knew each other might sound warm and comforting to some people, but for me, it was like living under a spotlight that only seemed to shine on one of us. My brother Mark. Even when we were little kids, the whole town treated him like he was made of fireworks and charm. He could walk into a room and every adult smiled like they were looking at the next local hero. Teachers adored him, neighbors spoiled him, relatives bragged about him, even when he hadn't done a single thing worth bragging about. Me, I was the oldest, the steady one, the kid who finished chores without being told, the one who kept his sneakers clean and did homework on time. I was the boy who double-checked the locks at night whenever my parents left town. People said I was responsible like it was a polite way of saying boring. And maybe they didn't mean it to hurt, but you feel it anyway when you're young. You feel the difference in how folks look at you even when nobody says a thing out loud. My mom never hid her pride in Mark. She used to say he had the spark. She would tell her friends that he had personality while I had duty. She said it like it was something she respected, but I could always hear the difference behind her tone. I understood later in life that spark is just another word people use when they like someone enough to excuse all their bad decisions. And responsibility is the word they use when they expect you to clean up the mess. As the years went on, that difference grew like a crack in a foundation that keeps getting wider every season. When Mark needed money, Mom always found a way to help him. He crashed his car once because he was speeding through a neighborhood where kids play. Instead of grounding him or making him take responsibility, she told everyone the road was icy even though it was the middle of June. When he failed his college classes, she said the professors didn't like him because he was too honest. When he quit his job after 3 months, she blamed the manager for being unfair. Then you had me, working 2 jobs in my 20s, saving every dollar, fixing old cars instead of buying new ones, paying my bills on time, buying my own house at 30, and every time I achieved something my mom responded like she predicted it years ago. She would say I was always the smart one, like my success was just automatic and not something I had broken my back building. She talked like all my effort was simply part of my personality, not something I should be proud of. But here's the part that stung the most. When Mark messed up, the world was unfair. When I succeeded, it was expected. Nothing I did impressed her. Everything he did impressed her, even when it was nothing at all. I remember one afternoon more clearly than anything. I was about 17, working in the backyard fixing the fence because our dog kept escaping. Mark was sitting on the porch drinking a soda, laughing, talking to his friends like he had no responsibilities at all. I had been outside for hours sweating in the sun. My mom came out, and instead of helping me or telling Mark to help, she looked right past me like I was hidden behind the fence boards. She asked Mark if he needed anything, if he wanted a sandwich, if he was feeling okay. She asked him that while I was scraping my hands raw on wood to fix something for her. That moment stayed with me, Not because it was the worst thing she ever did, but because it was the pattern, the unspoken rule in our family. Mark got the attention. I got the labor. When we became adults, that rule didn't just stay the same, it got louder. Mark bounced around like a pinball from one mistake to another, one job after another, one failed relationship after another. He asked my mom for money like it was his paycheck, and she gave it every time with this proud smile, like helping him was some kind of motherly honor. I kept showing up at her house fixing things she couldn't afford to repair: her roof, her pipes, her water heater. I picked up groceries for her, worked on her car, helped her with taxes, sat with her during storms. And she rarely said thank you. If she did, it was quick, like she was handing out a receipt, not gratitude. And right after that, she would start talking about how Mark was struggling and how she wished the world treated him better. She said it while standing inside a home I literally kept running with my own hands. 2 years before this last Christmas, things shifted even more. That was when Mom and my sister-in-law Liz became their own little duo. They were suddenly attached at the hip. They went everywhere together: stores, restaurants, holiday festivals. They shared recipes and secrets. They whispered and giggled like teenagers. And I stood on the outside of it all, like someone looking in through a window at a party I wasn't invited to. At first I thought maybe it was just something they were enjoying. Maybe it was harmless bonding. But then I began noticing things that made my stomach twist a little more each time. They would have dinners, and I'd only find out because someone posted a photo online. The kind of dinners where everyone sits around a table laughing like their lives are perfect. The kind of dinners where my seat used to be, except now the table only had room for them and their chosen circle. There were times they planned gatherings for family birthdays and holidays, not big events, just small get-togethers. Yet somehow the invitations never reached me. When I asked my mom about it, she played innocent. She would put a hand to her chest and say, "Oh, we thought you were busy." She said it so casually every time that I started recognizing it for what it was: not a misunderstanding, not an oversight, a deliberate choice. The worst part was I could hear the truth in her tone, the truth she didn't want to say out loud. They didn't want me there. They had built a comfortable little echo chamber where they could talk about Mark and praise Mark and defend Mark without any interruption. And I represented the one thing they hated most: accountability. I was the reminder of how much they enabled him. And reminders aren't always welcome. The final blow came one evening when I showed up unannounced with a bowl of chili I made because Mom had complained earlier that week she wasn't feeling well. I walked into her living room thinking I'd brighten her afternoon. Instead, I found her, Mark, Liz, and 2 family friends sitting together eating dinner. A full table, 4 plates, laughter filling the room, a holiday movie playing on the television. And no place set for me, not even an extra fork on the counter. I stood there for a moment holding the warm bowl between my hands, like I wasn't sure if I should drop it or throw it or turn around or ask what was going on. Mom looked at me surprised, but not in a guilty way. More like someone caught doing something embarrassing but not wrong. She said, "We thought you were busy." She said it again like it was her favorite excuse. I handed her the chili and left. I didn't argue, I didn't ask why, I didn't fight, I stayed quiet. And that was always my mistake: staying quiet, staying peaceful, staying the stable son. The son who never demanded a seat. The son who accepted crumbs while pretending they were enough. The son who thought loyalty and patience would eventually earn him a place at the table. But life taught me something in those slow, painful years. If you stay quiet long enough, people stop hearing you altogether. They stop seeing you. They forget you were ever part of the picture. And by the time that Christmas message came through telling me there was no room for me at the dinner table, it wasn't a surprise. It was just the final confirmation of something I had been feeling for years. I had already been pushed aside. All she did was finally say it out loud. I never thought a simple notification sound could split a life in half, but that morning it did. The sun had barely come up. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet you get used to when you live alone for years. I reached for my phone without thinking, stretching my arm across the nightstand the way I did every morning. I saw my mom's name, and for a second I felt something warm, familiar, even hopeful, like maybe this year she would remember that I was still her son. I opened the message expecting something simple, something like "be here at 5" or "bring dessert" or even a short "we are excited to see you." Instead I froze. The words were short, stiff, cold, like someone had scraped all the warmth out of them before sending them. She said Christmas dinner was already full and that I should enjoy the holiday on my own. That was it. No explanation. No sorry. No "we will see you another day." Just a plain rejection from the woman who used to hug me when I woke up from nightmares. For a moment I let the phone rest on my chest. I was lying there staring at the ceiling, feeling nothing and everything at the same time. Shock hit first, then confusion, then this sharp, quiet pain that settled behind my ribs like it had been waiting there for years. I told myself maybe she made a mistake, maybe she typed it wrong, maybe she meant something else, but the truth kept repeating itself in my mind. She did not want me there. I got up and walked to the kitchen. I turned on the coffee maker, then leaned on the counter waiting for the sound of warm comfort to calm me. But the coffee sat in the mug untouched. My hands were shaking just a little, not from anger. It was from that heavy disbelief when someone you trust crosses a line you never thought they would cross. I kept staring at the dark liquid, thinking about every Christmas I attended growing up. The lights, the food, the laughter. The way she used to call me her steady boy when I helped her decorate the tree. It was like all those memories got pushed to the side in one single morning. I walked to the living room and sat on the couch staring at nothing. My thoughts kept drifting back to all the years I tried to be the dependable son, the one who showed up, the one who fixed things, the one who kept the peace even when it cost me pieces of myself. But what was the point of being the steady one when you get forgotten anyway? The more I sat there, the more things began to make sense. The dinners I was not invited to, the conversations I never knew about, the choices she made with Mark and his wife without telling me. It all built up to that single message. It was like all the years of being pushed aside finally turned into a clear picture. A picture of a mother who chose one child completely and left the other one standing outside looking in. But here is the part she would never guess. I had been making changes long before that message ever came through. See, months earlier I had gone through something of a quiet transformation. You spend 5 decades working, building, saving, being responsible, and you start to think about what you are leaving behind. I sat down one afternoon with my lawyer and had a long conversation about my will. We talked about my house, my savings, my investments, my land, everything I had built through years of sacrifice and hard work. And in that moment, something inside me said, you need to think about who deserves this, not who expects it. So I made changes, big ones. I removed Mark completely, not out of spite, but because he never cared about anything I did and never once stood up for me. As for my mom, I reduced what she would receive. A quiet part of me hoped that maybe by the time she read the will she would understand why. But I also added something else, something unexpected, something I never told anyone. Something that would one day hit them harder than any words I could ever say. That morning, sitting on the couch holding that message in my hand, I felt something shift inside me. I realized their choices shaped mine. Their distance shaped my decisions. And the way they pushed me aside shaped the ending I was preparing for them. Not out of revenge in the dramatic sense, but out of truth. Pure truth. The kind that shows people exactly what their behavior cost them. So when I looked at that message again, I no longer felt confused. I no longer felt numb. I felt clear. Clear in a way I had not felt in years. They cut me out of Christmas, but they did not know they had already cut themselves out of something much bigger. And my final gift, the one they never saw coming, was going to show them exactly who they pushed away and what it cost them. And that was the moment everything changed. 2 days before Christmas, I learned the truth in a way that felt like someone pulled the rug out from under me and let me hit the floor without warning. I woke up that morning trying to convince myself that maybe the message from my mom had been typed in a moment of confusion. Maybe there was some misunderstanding that would clear itself up. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, because that is what I had done all my life. But sometimes life brings you the truth whether you are ready for it or not. I drove into town to pick up some groceries. The streets were crowded with people carrying wrapped gifts and holiday desserts. Kids were running in the parking lot with their little winter hats pulled down to their eyebrows. Everything felt alive with that familiar holiday buzz. I kept thinking about how I used to be part of that world, how Christmas used to feel warm and familiar even when life got messy. But that year, there was something colder under the surface, something that settled deep in my chest. After picking up a few things, I ran into my neighbor Carol outside the store. Carol was one of those talkative, friendly folks you see around town, the type who knows every detail about every street in our little corner of the world. She waved at me and walked over with a bright smile like nothing was wrong. She asked me if I was excited for Christmas, and I told her I was keeping it simple this year. I did not want to get into details. I did not want anyone to know what my mom had done. Then she said something that made my whole body tighten up. She told me she had driven past my mom's house the night before. She said the place was full of people, cars lined up down the road, music drifting through the windows, laughter loud enough that she could hear it from her car. She assumed it was some kind of early Christmas gathering, so she stopped to say hello. She told me she asked my mom if it was a Christmas dinner, and my mom said yes, it was a family dinner. I stood there in that parking lot feeling like the world had gone silent around me. A family dinner. That is what she called it. A family dinner where I did not exist. Carol kept talking in her cheerful voice, not knowing that every word she said felt like a needle sliding deeper under my skin. She said Mark's kids were running around the yard, and my mom was standing by the door greeting people like she was hosting the biggest celebration of the year. She said everyone looked happy. Everyone looked like they belonged. Everyone except me. I thanked Carol and walked away before she saw the look on my face. By the time I got to my truck, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped the grocery bag on the seat. I sat there with my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tight they turned pale. I kept replaying her words in my head. A family dinner. My mom introduced Mark's family as her entire family, not her family minus someone, not her family with one son stuck at work. No, her entire family. She erased me, fully, completely, like I had never been her son at all. The drive home felt longer than it had ever felt before. The sky looked dull. The radio sounded far away. The road felt endless. Every memory I ever had about helping my mom flooded my mind. All the times I fixed her roof. All the times I shoveled snow from her driveway. All the times I stayed late fixing her broken lights or taking her to appointments. Every moment of loyalty hit me like a wave, and in return I got silence, dismissal, and now erasure. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a while staring through the windshield at nothing. Something inside me broke, but not in a dramatic, loud way. It was a quiet break, the kind where you finally see the truth without any sugarcoating. I walked into the house and placed the groceries on the counter. I did not bother putting them away. I sat down at the kitchen table and stayed there until the sun disappeared from the windows. That night something shifted inside me. It was not anger, at least not the wild kind. It was clarity, a kind of deep, strong clarity that comes only when you have been pushed so far that there is no more space to bend. I realized I had spent years being the quiet one, hoping people would see my effort, my care, my worth. But sometimes people never see anything until you make them face it. I knew I could not go on pretending everything was fine. I could not keep letting myself be erased by the very people I spent my life protecting. If they wanted to write me out of their gatherings, their stories, their version of family, then they needed to understand what that really meant. And sometimes the only way to teach that lesson is through action, not words. I walked into my office and pulled open the drawer where I kept important documents. The folder was sitting right there, neat, clean, waiting. Inside was the updated will I had signed months earlier, the will that no one knew about, the will that reflected exactly how I felt after years of being treated like a placeholder rather than a son. I placed that folder on my desk and looked at it for a long time. It felt like holding a truth I had been afraid to speak out loud. But that night, I understood something. Family is not defined by titles or genetics. Family is defined by what people show you through their actions. And if their actions tell you that you are invisible, then you have every right to make choices that protect your heart and your future. That discovery that night, the truth about their secret family dinner, did not just hurt me. It pushed me over the edge into a place where the quiet one finally stands up, not with anger, not with noise, but with a decision that changes everything. The morning after learning about that secret family dinner, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest, but also with a clear sense of direction. It was the kind of clarity you only feel after you finally stop pretending things will get better on their own. I walked into my office with slow steps, like a man carrying a weight that had been building for years. The folder sat on my desk exactly where I left it the night before. It almost felt like it was staring back at me, reminding me that sometimes the only way to protect your heart is to make choices that honor your truth, not the version of life others try to force on you. I sat down and opened the folder. Inside was the will I had prepared months earlier. Every line, every sentence, every detail was written after long nights of thinking about my life, my relationships, and what legacy really means. I read it again from start to finish, even though I already knew every word by memory. But reading it that morning hit differently. It felt final. It felt real. It felt like I was finally standing up for myself after years of being pushed aside. The first major section detailed everything that would go to my goddaughter, Emma. That girl had been a light in my life since the day she was born. Her parents were friends of mine since high school. They had passed almost 10 years earlier, and Emma grew up mostly with her aunt. Whenever she needed someone to listen or guide her, she called me. Whenever she visited, she treated me with kindness and never once made me feel like an obligation. She had this calm sincerity that reminded me of what real connection feels like. She was not family by blood, but she sure felt like family in every way that mattered. I made the decision months ago that she would receive my home, my land, my savings, and everything that would help her build a strong future. She had dreams, real dreams, dreams that deserved support. And I knew she would use everything wisely because that was the kind of person she was. Someone who valued effort, someone who appreciated people, someone who carried respect in her voice and warmth in her heart, something I had not felt from my own family in a very long time. Then I reached the part where my mom was mentioned. I did not cut her off completely. Despite everything she had done, despite the favoritism, the lies, the cold distance, she was still my mother. The woman who raised me in those early years before everything shifted. I wrote that she would get a small portion. Not enough to reward her for the damage she caused, but enough to show I did not hate her. Enough to remind her that I cared once. Enough to let her feel that I did not choose anger but honesty. My honesty. But then came the part that carried the most weight. Mark, my younger brother, the golden child, the one who received everything while giving nothing, the one who took and somehow always convinced my mom he deserved more. The one who never stood up for me, not once, not even when things got unfair. I had removed him completely. No money, no belongings, no property, not even the smallest item. His name was not even in the will except in the section where I wrote the formal line explaining that he was intentionally excluded. It felt strange reading that paragraph again. Not satisfying, not joyful, just necessary. It was a reflection of every moment he brushed me aside, every moment he treated me like the background character in his story, every moment he let my mom push me out so he could take center stage. And now the man who lived his whole life expecting to receive everything would receive absolutely nothing. When I finished reading the document, I sat there for a long moment, letting the weight of it settle. This was not revenge in the usual sense. It was justice. It was truth. It was the first time I let myself acknowledge that blood alone does not shape loyalty. Actions do. I carefully folded the will and slid it back into the large envelope I bought months ago. Then I sealed it and placed it flat on the desk. I wrote my mom's name across the front in my handwriting. It looked so simple, so harmless, just a name on an envelope. But inside it held years of hurt, years of silence, years of being pushed aside, and years of pretending everything was okay. It held the truth of who I was to them and who they had become to me. My plan was simple. I would not confront them with yelling or anger. I would not show up to their Christmas table begging for space. They wanted a holiday without me, so I would give them something they never saw coming. On Christmas Eve, while they were busy celebrating as their picture-perfect family, I would place the envelope in my mom's hands and let her read the truth she never wanted to see. She cut me out of Christmas without hesitation. But on that day, she would learn that cutting someone out can come with consequences. Not loud consequences, not dramatic scenes, just honest consequences written in black ink, sealed in a quiet envelope. My truth wrapped in the one thing she could never ignore. Christmas Eve felt heavier that year than any I could remember. The sky hung low with thick gray clouds, and the light snowfall made the whole world look quiet and distant. It was the kind of weather that usually made me think about warm kitchens and family dinners, and the comfort of being around people who cared. But that day, the cold felt different. It matched the way my chest felt as I got into my truck and began the slow drive toward my mom's house. The road leading out of town was covered in a thin layer of snow that had fallen overnight. The tires crunched softly beneath me as I drove past houses lit with bright decorations and glowing windows. Every place I passed looked like its own little piece of the holiday. Families were inside preparing food, sharing stories, wrapping gifts. For a moment, I wondered how many of those people had someone they pushed away without even noticing. How many people were spending Christmas feeling like I did that year? When I turned onto my mom's street, the sight hit me harder than I expected. Her driveway was full. 3 cars were parked there. One was Mark's old truck, the one he never took care of but always expected others to help repair. The second belonged to his wife Liz. The third I did not recognize, but it looked like someone in the family had brought a guest. Maybe a friend, maybe another relative, someone they had room for, someone they had space for, someone who was not me. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I pulled up along the curb. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment staring at the house. The windows glowed warm with yellow light. Shadows moved inside. People laughing. People gathering. People who did not even realize I had been cut out like an old photograph that no longer mattered. I took a slow breath, reached for the envelope sitting on the passenger seat, and stepped out into the cold. The walkway leading up to the house was shoveled clean. Someone had placed a little wreath on the door and a small string of lights hung across the windows. It all looked warm and inviting, but none of it was meant for me. I walked up the steps and knocked on the door. I did not knock loudly, just enough for her to hear. The door opened after a moment, and there she was. My mom. She looked different that night. Maybe it was the coat she had on, or maybe it was the way her expression shifted when she saw me standing there. Surprise was the first thing I saw, then something like discomfort. And right after that came annoyance, like I was a salesman interrupting her evening instead of her son standing in the cold. She asked me what I was doing there. The tone was sharp, dismissive, like she had forgotten all the years I had been there for her, like I was a stranger instead of the boy she once held when I scraped my knee. Her eyes darted behind her into the house, and I could hear voices in the background. Laughter, plates clinking, someone talking brightly like they were in the middle of telling a story. She kept one hand on the door as if she was ready to close it the moment I finished talking. I told her I came to drop something off. That was all, nothing more, nothing less. Her eyebrows pulled together like she could not understand why I would show up. She did not invite me in. She did not step aside. She did not even offer me to come out of the cold. She stood there blocking the warmth behind her with her coat still on, almost like she was ready to get back to her night and pretend this moment never existed. I held out the envelope. She glanced at it, then asked what it was. Her voice sounded confused but not concerned, not curious in a caring way. It was more like she was bothered that I had brought her something unexpected when she had a celebration going on inside. I told her it was something she should read before celebrating Christmas. That was all I said. I kept my voice steady, calm, and quiet because anger was long gone. The only thing left was truth. She looked at the envelope, then back at me. She did not say thank you. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not say she wanted to see me later. She just stood there with that same defensive look on her face. But she took the envelope. She held it in one hand almost like it was something fragile but unwelcome. I turned around before she could say anything else. I walked back down the steps and onto the snowy walkway. The cold air felt sharp on my face, but something inside me felt strangely warm. Not joy, not satisfaction, but relief. A soft, quiet relief that came from finally letting go of something heavy I had carried for years. As I reached my truck, I glanced back once. She was still standing in the doorway holding the envelope. The warm light from inside poured around her, but for the first time I realized that warmth was never meant for me. Not anymore. Maybe not for a long time. I got in the truck, started the engine, and drove away. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I finally told the truth in the only language they could not ignore. And as the snow continued to fall lightly on the windshield, I knew that Christmas Eve would never be the same for any of us again. Later that night, long after the last car had driven past my street and the faint glow from my porch light was the only thing keeping the darkness at bay, my phone started buzzing. At first I ignored it. One ring, two rings. I sat in the living room, my hands folded, staring at the snow falling softly outside my window. I knew who it was. I could feel it in the vibration, in the way my chest tightened with every pulse. My mom. Maybe Mark. Maybe both of them. Probably the whole household, realizing that the envelope I left wasn't just another document. The buzzing didn't stop. Calls, texts, notifications piling up one after another, relentless. I didn't answer, not yet. I sat there letting the storm rage on in my pocket. Let them fume, let them guess, let them panic. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I picked up. My thumb hovered over the screen, my heart beating steady but heavy. I pressed answer. "Daniel, is that you?" Her voice cracked instantly. A sound I hadn't heard in decades, shaking, fragile, and filled with the kind of fear that comes from realizing you misjudged someone you thought you knew. Why would you do this? Her words tumbled over themselves. Why would you leave everything to someone outside the family? It feels like you've abandoned us. Her voice, the pitch, the trembling, it was raw. It was a mix of panic and betrayal, the same way I had felt for years watching her favor Mark and his reckless ways. But this time, the roles were reversed. This time, I had the calm, the clarity, and the truth. I took a deep breath. I could feel the years of holding in frustration, of swallowing my hurt, of pretending that it didn't matter, rise in my chest. But instead of yelling, instead of lashing out, I spoke slowly. I let my words land carefully, like stones skipping across water. "Mom, I didn't abandon anyone. You abandoned me." There was a pause on the line, a long pause. I could hear her catching her breath, fumbling with something, maybe the receiver. And I kept going, steady, deliberate, letting the years of silent suffering finally have their voice. "You cut me out. You told me Christmas was full and that I wasn't welcome. You left me out of dinners, conversations, family gatherings that you claimed I should have been part of. You erased me. I didn't leave you out. You left me out." I could hear her swallowing. Her voice, when it came back, was softer, uncertain, like she was suddenly realizing the weight of every single moment she had dismissed me. "Daniel, I didn't know." "You did know," I said. My voice wasn't angry, not yet. It was calm, precise. "You knew and you chose to ignore it. And I've spent years letting it slide, letting it go, hoping maybe you'd see me. Hoping maybe I was imagining it, but the truth is you made your choice, so I made mine. The will reflects exactly what you've shown me over all these years, that I don't matter, that my life, my work, my care, my effort, it's invisible to you. And now the paperwork matches the reality you created." Silence. A deep, bone-deep silence stretched across the line. I could hear her breathing, slow and uneven. I could imagine her sitting at the kitchen table, the envelope open before her, realizing for the first time that what she took for granted had finally spoken back. That the quiet, steady son, the one she assumed would always be there, always giving, always forgiving, had finally drawn a line. And in that silence, I realized she understood. Not the relief, not the happiness, not a rush of anger or vindication, but understanding. For the first time, she saw me clearly. Not just the son who fixes, who gives, who stands in the shadows while Mark takes center stage. She saw me as I always was. Someone who deserved recognition, someone who deserved respect, someone whose love was not infinite unless it was reciprocated. Her voice came again, softer this time, almost a whisper. Daniel, I never thought you felt like this. I didn't respond right away. I just let her hear the quiet that had been building for years. The quiet that said more than I ever could. And in that moment I felt something shift, not because I had hurt her, not because I had won, but because finally, after all these years, the truth landed where it needed to. She didn't argue, she didn't cry, she didn't beg. She just listened to the stillness, to the reality that she had created, and to the choice I had made in response. And in that quiet, heavier than any words, I knew the lesson had reached her. For the first time, the invisible sun was seen. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. The morning after Christmas was quiet in my neighborhood, the kind of quiet that settles after a storm when snow glitters across rooftops and the world seems paused in a breathless stillness. My phone buzzed early, though not with the gentle messages of friends wishing a merry holiday. No, this was different. The caller ID showed Mark's name, and even before I answered, I could feel the tension threading through my chest. I knew what this call would be before I even picked it up. I had lived long enough to read his energy, his tone, his entitlement. Daniel, his voice exploded through the receiver the instant I said hello. He sounded like a hurricane in human form, angry, frantic, uncontained. Are you kidding me? Are you serious? What the hell are you thinking? You can't do this. This is cruel. You're being dramatic, selfish. He trailed off into a volley of insults that rolled one after another, no pause, no chance to breathe. I could hear him packing, stomping, knocking things over, probably shaking furniture, yelling into the phone as if his anger could knock the snow off my roof from miles away. I let him yell. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself immediately. I let every word hit the air between us, and with each sentence I felt a strange calm settling over me. The storm that had been brewing inside me for decades, the anger, the hurt, the frustration at always being the invisible sun, was no longer roaring. It was quiet, deliberate, patient. And I realized I didn't have to argue to make him understand. His words had no power here. Finally, when he paused to take a breath, or maybe to gather more insults, I spoke. My voice was steady, even the kind of voice that carries weight not through volume but through certainty. Mark, I said simply, forgiveness works both ways. You can't take everything and never give respect in return and then expect me to just hand over everything without question. You wanted my money, but you never wanted my presence. You wanted my support, but you never wanted my respect. You wanted everything, except accountability. He went silent for a fraction of a second, but it didn't last. Accountability, he shouted. I don't owe you anything. I'm your brother. Family forgives, Daniel. Family always forgives. I smiled just a little, though he couldn't see it. Family forgives, I said, my voice calm as I repeated his words slowly, deliberately. But family also acts like family. Family shows up. Family respects the people who stand by them. You wanted forgiveness, yes, but you never wanted fairness. And you'll find that you can't have one without the other. He exploded again, this time throwing everything he could think of at me. The old accusations of being cold, distant, unfeeling. The old guilt trips about how he had struggled, how I should understand, how Mom favored him. The insults flew fast and sharp, but this time they did not land. They bounced off me like rain on a roof. I had spent decades letting words like these crush me, letting them bend my mind, make me doubt myself. But now, hearing him rage, I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. There was a strange liberation in it, this newfound immunity to the chaos he created. I wasn't angry. I wasn't resentful. I wasn't even shocked anymore. For the first time in my life, the people who had shaped my world with favoritism, neglect, and entitlement could scream, hurl, and try to manipulate, and I remained untouched. The storm no longer had a hold over me. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, he hung up abruptly. No goodbye, no sense of closure, just silence on the other end. I put the phone down slowly, letting it rest on the table. The silence that followed was heavy, yes, but not oppressive. It was freeing. It marked a moment I had long anticipated without fully realizing it. The moment I understood that their anger, their demands, their attempts to guilt me were reflections of themselves, not of my value. For the first time, I could see everything clearly. Their sense of entitlement, their refusal to see me as anything other than a shadow, their constant favoritism, it all lay bare. The truth I had held onto for years, the quiet knowledge that I had been pushed aside, undervalued, erased, was now visible for me in stark clarity. And unlike before, I didn't have to fight against it. I didn't have to bend, accommodate, or apologize for existing. I walked over to the window, looking out at the winter landscape. The snow fell softly, glistening like crystal across the rooftops, as if the world itself had paused to witness this turning point. The anger, the shouting, the expectations of my family, they were outside, distant, irrelevant. Inside me, there was calm, purpose, and a profound sense of justice that no words or insults could disrupt. That morning, as the phone lay silent beside me, I realized something fundamental. For the first time in my life, I was no longer defined by their actions, their favoritism, or their refusal to see me. I was defined by my choices, and in that definition there was power, freedom, and finally, peace. The reactions of my family, the shouting, the accusations, the frantic attempts to reclaim what they thought was theirs, it exposed everything. Their selfishness, their blindness, their inability to understand the person I had always been, and the respect I had always deserved. And in that exposure, I found something I had been searching for my entire life: clarity, strength, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I had finally stood up for myself in a way they could not ignore. The weeks that followed the Christmas upheaval felt surreal, almost like living in a world that had been turned upside down and then slowly righted, but not quite in the same place it had been before. I woke each morning with a quiet sense of control that I had never known, a calm that came from finally acting in alignment with my truth. The envelope, the will, the decision I had made, it had rippled outward in ways I could not have imagined, and yet in the same way it brought a clarity I had been longing for all my life. Mom was the first to reach out. The calls came slowly at first, hesitant, as if she were testing the waters, unsure if I would pick up, unsure if I would even speak to her after everything that had happened. When I did answer, her voice was different. It trembled, yes, but it carried something I hadn't heard in years: humility. A fragile, tentative sort of humility, like she was stepping onto new ground without the confidence of experience, but with the intention of walking carefully. She did not ask for money, did not plead for her share of the inheritance, and did not make excuses. Instead, she asked if we could talk, just talk. In the conversations that followed, I could hear a shift happening, slow but undeniable. She spoke in ways she had never spoken before, without criticism, without condescension, without the quick, dismissive phrases that had defined our relationship for decades. She admitted that she had taken me for granted, that she had allowed favoritism to cloud her judgment, and that she had erased my presence in her life without realizing the cost. She said losing the idea of her oldest son's support, the reality that I could choose my own path, had opened her eyes. It was as if the shock of my choices had forced her to see what she had been blind to all these years. I listened. I let her speak without interruption, without argument, without judgment. For the first time, I experienced conversations with my mother that felt real, honest, human. She was not just my mother, the authority, the critic, the dispenser of expectations. She was a person admitting fault, seeking reconciliation, asking permission to rebuild something that had been broken for decades. And in that, I felt a strange relief, a sense of quiet power not derived from winning or punishing, but from simply being seen, being acknowledged, and finally respected. We started slow. One phone call became two, then letters, then short visits. I did not rush. I did not leap back into the life I had been pushed away from. This was different. This was deliberate. This was about building boundaries, about rebuilding trust, about being seen as a son and a human being with value, not as a shadow in the background. And for the first time, I felt that our interactions carried the possibility of authenticity instead of expectation. Mark, unsurprisingly, stayed distant. He avoided calls, text messages, and any attempts to reconnect. But I did not mind. In fact, it was a gift. His absence gave the airspace for me to breathe, to think, and to measure relationships on truth rather than obligation. The anger, the entitlement, the demands that had defined him for decades could no longer distract me or pull me back into patterns that had caused me endless frustration. I realized that sometimes absence, especially the absence of those who refuse to understand, is a blessing disguised as isolation. In those quiet weeks, I began to notice small things that mattered more than I expected. A text from Emma telling me about her day, a laugh shared with a friend over coffee, a moment of reflection in my empty living room where the silence no longer felt lonely but steady and full. I realized I had spent so many years bending myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me that I had forgotten how liberating it feels to be present in my own life, on my own terms. Mom kept trying, reaching out, asking questions, seeking my opinion on things she never thought to ask before. And slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild. It was nothing like the past, and that was exactly what I wanted. It was not a return to old roles or old expectations. It was a fresh start rooted in honesty, respect, and the understanding that love is not entitlement and forgiveness is not a free pass for repeated hurt. And in the quiet, I discovered something I had never expected. The aftermath, the shock, the confrontation. It had not only exposed the cracks in my family, it had illuminated the strength I had gained, the boundaries I had set, and the kind of life I could build for myself. I no longer felt the sting of favoritism or the suffocating weight of unmet expectations. I had acted, I had spoken, and I had reclaimed myself. For the first time in decades, I felt whole. Not because my family was perfect, not because everyone understood, and certainly not because Mark had changed, but because I had finally stepped out of the shadow of being overlooked, ignored, and dismissed. I had made my choices, stood firm, and now lived in a world where my presence, my worth, and my love were acknowledged for what they had always been, real, steadfast, and undeniable. The aftermath was quiet, yes, but it was also powerful. It was the calm after the storm, the clarity after years of confusion, the reward for standing firmly in truth. And it was exactly what they did not expect, because they had spent so long underestimating me, assuming I would always be there, assuming I would always forgive, assuming I would never act in alignment with my own life. But I did. And in that, the family that had overlooked me for so long finally saw me, not as a shadow, but as the man I had always been. Christmas had always been a season of warmth in my mind, a time when lights twinkled on every street, when laughter filled homes, and when the scent of pine and cookies brought a sense of belonging that I had longed for all year. But over the decades, that warmth had faded. The holiday became a subtle reminder of what I was not, the favored son, the celebrated child, the one who mattered most. Each year I sat at the edges of gatherings, offering help, giving quietly, sacrificing without acknowledgement, and wondering why the love I poured into my family always seemed to vanish into the air before anyone noticed. That Christmas, the one that changed everything, transformed that holiday in ways I could never have anticipated. It became a mirror that reflected truths too long ignored, too long buried beneath years of favoritism, neglect, and silent suffering. I realized something vital. Family is not built by blood alone. It is not defined by a shared last name, shared holidays, or shared history. Family is built on love, respect, and effort. Actions speak louder than words. Effort speaks louder than entitlement. And respect, true respect, is the foundation that allows bonds to survive. Without it, even the closest of ties can break. My decision with the will, my quiet act of revelation, was never about revenge. I did not derive satisfaction from punishing my mother or my brother. I did not relish the confrontation or the shock in their eyes when they discovered the choices I had made. No, it was something far more profound. It was about truth, the kind of truth that cuts through assumptions, excuses, and appearances. The truth that says, if you erase someone from your life, if you treat them as invisible, do not be surprised when they take steps to protect themselves, to assert their presence, and to honor their worth. In that truth, my mom finally saw the consequences of her choices. She recognized slowly and painfully the way she had favored Mark, the way she had ignored me, the way she had assumed my loyalty was guaranteed regardless of her treatment. And Mark, well, Mark learned a lesson he could not escape. He realized that life is not just about taking, that expectations are fragile when trust is broken, and that accountability is unavoidable when someone decides to stand in their own power. As for me, the revelation was transformative. I learned that standing up for yourself is not betrayal. It is survival. It is the act of affirming your existence in a world that may try to diminish it. It is about setting boundaries, protecting your heart, and refusing to accept invisibility as a lifelong condition. That Christmas, the one meant to celebrate family, became a crucible that shaped me. The holiday that once highlighted my absence now underscored my presence. The moment of exclusion became the moment of empowerment. I discovered that life does not owe us fairness, and people do not always act with gratitude. But we can choose how to respond, how to value ourselves, and how to claim our rightful place in the world. I had spent too long in the shadows, in the margins, quietly giving, quietly loving, quietly hopping. That Christmas, I stepped into the light, not to shame, not to strike, but to declare my worth, my boundaries, and my truth. It was painful. It was lonely at times, but it was also liberating. It was the moment I finally became the man I should have always been, the man who respects himself, who protects his heart, and who understands that love is meaningful only when it is mutual. That Christmas broke the illusions of family, shattered long-held assumptions, and revealed the raw, unfiltered reality of my relationships. And in doing so, it built me into the man who could face the world with clarity, strength, and dignity. So now, when I think of Christmas, I do not think only of lights, gifts, or traditions. I think of lessons learned, boundaries set, and truth spoken. I think of the strength it took to step away from years of being overlooked, and the courage it required to confront a reality that was uncomfortable but necessary. That Christmas broke us in ways that were undeniable, but it also built me. Built me into someone who is finally whole, someone who knows that self-respect is not negotiable, and someone who finally stands fully in his own life. This was the Christmas that broke us but built me. The Christmas that taught me that love without respect is empty, that family without recognition is fragile, and that standing up for yourself is not just right, it is essential.